Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week we've got a whole new bag for our grab bag coverage, horror games to chat about, stuff we've been playing recently, that being Daemonologie, a little bite-sized indie horror game that I just couldn't pass up chatting about this week. Neil is going to fill us in on Dying Like the Beast, which is a game that we talked about very, very briefly several months ago. And now, he's going to give us the full scoop and report on that before I round us out on a game that unfortunately we didn't get around to, I believe it was last year, that being Eclipsium, which is a game we covered for Horror Bites, the demo of, long time ago. And so I was fortunate enough to have some free time this week to spend playing that. And yet again, a game that I'm kicking myself now for overlooking. However, it just can't be helped sometimes with sort of litany of games we get right at the end of the year. That's one of the many downfalls of being a December release, I suppose. But before I get into a bit of housekeeping, Neil, how are you doing this week?
Yeah, not too bad. Time feels like it's flown by this week. I don't know about you. It's the holidays. So it naturally does just end up feeling a bit. Having said that, it really isn't that long since we recorded. So it's probably why it as well. Like it's really, we're doing this again very quickly.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm fortunate, as I was telling you before we started recording, with the Easter holiday coming up, I got a lot more free time than I usually do. So I've been taking advantage of that to play some stuff that otherwise I might not have the time to. But already a quick amend to what I was saying with Eclipsium. That's a September release, but still something towards the end of last year sometimes tend to get overlooked. But before we dive into our first bit of grab bag coverage, a bit of housekeeping for everyone listening. Be sure to tune back in this coming Thursday for Horror Bites, our indie horror showcase minisode, if you will, as the upcoming episode will be rounding out our month's theme of aquatic horror with Sometimes Dead is Wetter, in which we highlight the two final picks of ours that utilize that subgenre in memorably horrifying ways and whatnot. And, since we already have that episode in the bag, we really went out of our way to kind of pick games that utilized aquatic horror in very different ways in terms of like the various genres that they occupy outside of that, aquatic horror theme. But that's been a fun one. And I think that's something we've really enjoyed about, Horror Bites going to bi-weekly now, is that we get to cover not only one, but two games in a given episode, and get to kind of like play around with the theme every month or so. So next month, it'll be me, and we'll see what kinds of horrors I come up with.
Yeah. It's like, it's a good fun format for doing that.
Yeah. Keeps things nice and fresh too, because otherwise you end up with the good problem to have. But last year, with me especially, I feel like every week for 6 months straight, I was picking adventure horror games, which is not a bad thing, but it's nice to have a bit more variety going into the new year with Horror Bites.
Yeah, I spent part of the week writing about them as well. Yeah, like it's like it never truly escape it.
Like I said, a good problem to have, but we're finding a nice variety there, I think, and whatnot. But and getting to our grab bag, given that it is the shortest game we're going to talk about this week, given the length of it, I figured I'd kick things off with Daemonologie from a developer that we have covered previously, that being developer Daemonologie, which is the developer behind a game that we covered also the demo of for Horror Bites, that being Dead Format, which was released at the end of last year. But I'm here to talk about Daemonologie, which is a game from 2024, in which it is a short folk horror story about the Scottish witch trials. And so you play basically a witch hunter or a witch finder, and you're dropped into this small village, and it's up to you to basically interview the various inhabitants of this small village. Each one of them is tied to like a different occupation of sorts. And then through those conversations, or as I'll get into, the horror torture mini games, you have to decide basically who is the witch, who is lying, and who are the poor souls that you have potentially tortured for no good reason at all. So the whole premise is that you basically have 5 days to carry out your interviews and your interrogations. And you can do that through basically conversation, or as I mentioned, you can do it through a number of different torture mini games. It's kind of like the sadists version of WarioWare, actually. So the ways that works is that, if you decide, well, this person might be lying, you initiate the torture, and that takes on several mini games. And the mini games are like really, really simple in construction. One of them is that you tie basically like a weight to the victim's tongue, and basically you have this bar that goes up and down, and you have to center it on their tongue. And when that happens, it basically like achieves the torture technique, if you will. And you need to do that a couple of times successfully, and then they will either confess or basically continue to plead their ignorance, at which that's going to be the cross for the player to bear, so to speak. There's a couple of mini games like this that are all like very quick time sort of focused. They're not necessarily very creative in terms of their implementation. However, what I will say is that like the presentation is really what kind of like reinforces the strength of this game, I think, in terms of essentially establishing the time period. Because of the various torture methods are very area appropriate, but also like the game sports this black and white graphic style, but also in between the various days, like you can interview, I think, 1 or 2 people in each village, and then you have to basically call it a day and go to sleep and wake up and do it all over again. But in between each one of those days, you get these stop motion cutscenes, like claymation cutscenes, essentially. And those are so incredibly unnerving, which is, an inherent strength, I think, of stop motion. And this is where the true like artistic styling and like aesthetic of this game really kind of like makes it a really wonderful mood piece for something that, I don't know, it took me maybe 20 or 30 minutes to finish this game. But it's also a $3 game. So like that doesn't bother me at all, because it does a lot with a very sort of like simplistic approach, if you will, but it really does kind of deliver with that art style and the mood there within.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, I do like the stop motion sort of aspect of it as well. I think it works quite well, that sort of monochrome style, to the visuals that you have. That it's kind of like with how certain things look better in like dark light, in terms of presentation. It just gives it this very timely feel for the time.
Yeah.
Timely is the wrong word I'm thinking of, but like it feels of that time a bit more. Like it's like you're reading some sort of weird enchanted book almost, like in terms of like how it sort of is laid out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, so is it similar to like other sort of deduction games in the sense of like there's ones where you are presented with a person and basically it's up to you to decide whether they are one thing or the other, is the basic premise?
Yeah. So basically, you're going to be interacting with these different residents of the village, and through the dialogue, it's up to the player. And I think that, each one of them is based in a different profession. So, like, there's a blacksmith, there's a priest, and then at the same time, there's one character that she's either been accused of being a witch, or there's another character that is like a prostitute or something like that. And so it really is like you trying to sift through what is essentially like the bullshit and preconceived notions of this small town, small village, because people are going to be accusing others of things. And then it really, at the end of the day, ties into whether the player is going to listen to those accusations from others, or if it's based on something that one of the characters says that kind of like gives you pause. And in that case, then you can go right into the sort of torture, or you can take their word for it. So I think in that regard, like it's nice that you have this almost like character study, if you will, that sort of like makes you, the player, decide. And then at the end of the day, if you don't successfully pick who the witch is, essentially at the end of those 5 days, the game
Mm.
does not tell you. So then you're incentivized to go back, which is what happened with me. The first time I chose and accused the wrong person of being a witch. And then I was left with this open ended narrative. And so I immediately went back and replayed it. And the second time around, I was a little bit more, deductive in terms of my interviewing skills and whatnot, and plunged somebody into a pool of water for a little longer than I did last time, and was able to kind of like derive the correct answer there within. So, yeah, it's one of those games that I think does a good job of presenting very plainly. However, there is some player choice that will influence how that first initial playthrough goes.
It's weird, isn't it? It's like because Papers, Please was like in
Mm,
many ways a sort of forebearer of this style, if
yeah,
you will, where you kind of give the player a certain agency that is very like personal to you. Then it's like you are very much informing the character through your own internal logic and biases. And in things like this, especially and Papers, Please, it's a case of like, well, this is the job. This is the job I've got to do. I've got to see it out. And I like the games that do that in a way
mm,
that you do kind of put someone into a situation of making them think like that, because logically, yeah, in a real life situation, well, I don't want to do this job, like sort of thing, but like that. But yeah, it's fascinating that as a sort of subgenre, it's kind of had this resurgence in recent years where quite a few big games, have had
yeah,
that thing happen. I mean, there's that, the one, I think the game is called, yeah, basically that Board of a Troll type style game, but they put infected in rather than as being illegal immigrants, if you want to put it. And
mm,
yeah, it's an interesting way to take it, I think, because there's often a complaint, I think, that you have games that player choices, like it's arbitrary because the game's still going to go this way or that way, and it's like, well, when you are kind of putting that much into it, like, and you're playing a role so freely, it's kind of disturbing in itself, isn't it? That
yeah,
you are just sinking into the idea of what the game's objective and gamifying the idea of just like choosing if people live or die in a different way to how games
mhm,
have done for many years. And
yeah,
yeah, it's cool that it can be done in all these different ways. And I think horror obviously suits it quite well because it's horrific to even think about it like that. But yeah, I like that sound of that as well. So there is something really cool about games that do give players that kind of choice that isn't, quite not the like who lives, who dies in a sort of ending A, ending B sort of choice, and make it a bit more free form. Um, especially with like games of deduction in general
yeah.
that have this as well. So, yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah, it's really a perfect primer for a game that I'm hopeful we're going to cover in the future. That being Dead Format. Now that that's been released, and
Mm,
we covered the demo for Horror Bites and whatnot, but I really do think that Daemonologie is a great primer for just like this developer's ability to establish like a sense of a setting and having some historical context to it. That being the witch
mm,
trials and things. It being set in Scotland also is like cool just because you get a little bit of that um, foreign flair, I suppose foreign for me being an American and whatnot, but like if you're a fan of like Robert Eggers' The Witch, this is something that I think
mm.
would be just up your, alley, so to speak. So, yeah, really a great, little bite-sized horror game that you're not going to spend probably more than an hour with it, but at $3, it is quite memorable and very unnerving. Again, whether it's the player decision making that goes into it, or just the presentation and that really like ominous stop motion work there. Like really, really
Yeah,
terrific stuff.
yeah, good stuff.
But for you, you're going to tell us about a game that I think we briefly discussed on the podcast, but didn't get too into the weeds with. That being
Yeah,
Dying Light the Beast.
yeah, which was mainly because I barely had a chance to play it. I think
Mm.
it just came at the wrong time. There was a
Yeah.
whole bunch of stuff out. And as much as I'd wanted to play it, like, yeah, I believe I was at a film festival for that weekend, and like that it came out, and so I kind of, yeah, didn't get into the groove of it and had stuff to do afterwards. But
Mm.
yeah, and I don't know, it's a game that's had like a very weird sort of journey, because like in the wake of Dying Light 2, this was originally supposed to be an expansion on that game, which did end up having its own expansions anyway. And the thing about Dying Light 2 is, people who love Dying Light were not so keen, on Dying Light 2, because it was
Hmm.
bigger, but it lost something in terms of like detail and in terms of how the world felt. Like, I mean, Haran in the first game just really does have a particular feel to it, and the atmosphere of it is great. There is something a bit more confusing about in a second game. Here, it's like in starting life as something smaller, they've basically just said, well, yeah, we can do smaller but dense, that we can have more detail to it, and yet kind of do a greatest hits package of everything that
Mm.
was in the previous Dying Light game. So you have vehicles and vehicle combat from the following DLC from the first game, which again don't come till later. You have, like this very tightly packed map with has big expansive areas and has like clustered little city place to it as well. And it has almost like a European sort of German Austrian sort of styles of it in terms of like the buildings and like the
Mm.
countryside. Um, and yeah, it kind of the thing that happened towards the end of Dying Light 2 was this whole, oh, suddenly you've got zombie powers and like that, you can go flip mental with them in like very sporadic moments. And now returning as the hero of the first game, Kyle Crane, you basically have like powers from the beginning, but you can't really control them straight away. So occasionally he will just like rage out and be like, Samson from 28 years later, and just like full on pulverize anything in his wake. And I didn't know how to think of that at first, to be fair, because I was happy that, oh, good, you Dying Light, all the cool things that Dying Light does, but does that not ruin the danger of it, that you have
Mm.
this, sense of power? But because it is sporadic, and because, he is still only hanging on by Fred, and he's been basically tortured for years and years, and only just recently escaped by the time the game starts, it still managed to throw enough of a threat at you that it starts to feel like intimidating. There's I mean, one of the great early examples is like a side mission. It doesn't, it's not really anything major, but it's a great indicator of like how they've doubled down on like how the missions feel, how the characters in these missions feel, and
Mm.
just like how they retain the danger. That you're
Mm.
sent into this cave system nearby where someone's, dementia riddled father has basically gone in there. It's like when they go into this whole thing about how he's only really looking out because he's his dad, but he doesn't really like his dad because he was a horrible alcoholic and just very much an arsehole to him. But just out of general obligation, you go to help. And yeah, so the guy's confused, thinks you're his son, and like, but he's basically told you rigged this cave up to below because there's lots of like where people had been living there. Soldiers
Mm.
had blocked them in, and also the infected in there, and the volatiles ended up in there. And yeah, you go around this cave sneakily trying to set these like explosives up reel to reel like that, and it's really tense. And this is like supposed to be like a level one mission, if you will, as for the rankings they do for it. But you've got volatiles and all these other types in there, and you're sneaking around. You're seeing evidence of all the people who did live there, like that. And
Mm.
yeah, it's a nice little bit of storytelling, and has tension, because it's like, sure, you could eventually have the power to just take these fuckers out, but everything's so limited in terms of like what your weapons can do. Well, there's more guns in this one, yeah, because obviously Dying Light 2's big thing originally was it didn't have guns properly, and so
Right.
they went for the sort of new medieval sort of thing. But yeah, they're back here, and so you have a bit of that. But again, countered by the fact that they're loud, they make noise, it attracts some, more attention than you want. But yeah, so the more I've played it, the more it's felt like the original game to me. We've got a few cool bits that Dying Light 2 did quite well that I really enjoyed. And I look at the map even now and I'm thinking, Christ, I've barely seen any of it. And it feels quite dense. I think it really
Mm.
does just the detail and the amount of stuff you'll find in any given area. It's really great like that. And it makes the night times very unnerving because there's such a verticality to certain areas because it's like in like a mountainous region. So there's like peaks and valleys in terms of where the place goes. So suddenly it's not just easy to just go rooftop to rooftop to rooftop across. Like it's not flat like a lot of Haran was.
Mm.
And so yeah, you have to kind of figure your way out of different things. There are just sometimes large expanses where you can't do much, in the early going, beyond just like work your way around and hope you don't get caught in a chase. Yeah, it's I've not played it in co-op yet, which, as I think I said to you before, is like one of those things where it kind of devalues the horror and the tension of it a bit and makes it a bit of a goof. Yeah, I think we were saying this last week actually, funnily enough. And yeah, but so I've not gotten to that, but I would think it's the purest experience anyway with Dying Light games if you can play it solo because that's
Mm.
when you get such tension. Yeah, and just as a general world that it's in, this Castor Woods place that it's in, yeah, it just looks beautiful. For what it is, but it's quite resorty. Like cabins and stuff like that in certain areas, and then there's that very sort of European buildings, and yeah, yeah, it is definitely a return to form, and it's nice to see that they took the ambition of what they were doing with the second game, but learned everything that in that time. Because I think with Dying Light 2, everything they did afterwards was pretty much a reaction to how people saw that game. It was like, okay, it's too big, it does this, it does that, and they just basically started putting stuff back in, that was in the original game.
Mm.
But yeah, this is yeah, I had worried that it was just going to be an expansion that they kind of just bolted some stuff on top, but it really does feel like a proper Dying Light game. So it's
Mm.
like not numbered, but it's we're talking like Code Veronica Nemesis situation, where it's like it's it may not be a called for in that sense and free in this sense, but it is, for all intents and purposes, it's part free.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it is harkening back to the days of like standalone expansions almost. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Or standalone entries in a series. Something, the first thing that came to mind for me was like Stalker Clear Skies,
Hmm.
which built upon the original game and everything, but you could totally play it solo without having, Stalker Shadow Chernobyl installed and whatnot. But I guess one thing that I'm curious about is that Dying Light 2, reintroduced dealing with like human enemies and factions. And clearly, with Dying
Hmm.
Light the Beast, it seems like there's another added emphasis on fighting rival factions, but it seems like there's more of an emphasis on gunplay with them. Do you find
Hmm.
that these sections add a challenge, a nice variety, or do they kind of maybe get in the way of a flow of gameplay by kind of like shoehorning in perhaps some of these aspects?
I think early on they're quite smart with it. In one of the first real like multi-person sort of combat encounters is when Kyle has one of his like rage out. So you are just
Mm.
basically just tearing them limb from limb, and
Mm.
then there's a few stragglers to deal with. And welcomingly, when they do then give you the first bunch of stragglers when you're back to normal, they are just armed with melee weapons.
Mm.
And then you get out of that, and then you go out into the rooftops, and some of them have got guns, but you can sort of dodge between stuff. And because of your parkour skills and your general sort of athleticism, it's quite easy to just change between things. And yeah, it's like the enemies aren't like super hard in that regard. I did worry that lots of gunfire and things like that would cause problems, but no, I think generally whenever you're kind of put in those occasions, it's good because they do give you the right environment to fight them in. They don't just show up anywhere, sort of thing. Um, I think it's the only problem with like the map I would say in that regard though is that you do end up like when going from like level to level in terms of verticality, is it's not always easy to judge how far you're going to be able to jump if you can climb on certain things in the way that was clearer maybe in the earlier games.
Mm.
So sometimes in trying to escape a situation, you can fall flat on your face, and and the combat is a bit slower in some ways, more methodical. I mean, it's weightier, and like Dead Island 2, I think proves that you could do really meaty sort of combat and make it feel like that. It's not quite as good as that system they had with the flesh system, I think it was in Dead Island 2, where it's like proper degradation, but it's doing something close to it, which is good. I like that they looked at that and kind of maybe embarrassed, oh God, like someone else gone in to doing what we were doing before and done it better, sort of thing. And given Dead Island 2's reputation as being vaporware effectively until it finally got, then it was amazing that it came out so good. So I kind of hope that was motivation for them, that they saw what happened with that and were like, okay, we know what people want. We know that it doesn't have to be more expensive in terms of the world, doesn't have to be massive. Get back to what we could do well. And I think they've done a fantastic job with it. I haven't tried out like the new mode that's come out, which is it's called the Restored Land, which basically makes it more of a survival game, in terms of like limited supplies, permanent sort of permanence in certain areas of the game, so that if you clear out an area of undead, they don't come back in that area, and it restores. But then also no supplies from that area as well. There are less supplies at like at the stores in there as well. And you could just basically got to eat to survive and stuff like that. I think I need to get better to grips with the game as it is before I go into that. But it does sound fascinating as an idea, that the idea that you can just, as they put it, take the map back step by step, like, and basically have areas where it's like, I can just run through this now without care in the world.
No, I think that feels like a natural kind of mode to add to, my familiarity with Dying Light is the original, but still, that feels like a very natural sort of mode to include because of not only the open world nature of it, but also just the sort of inherent survival-esque approach to gameplay there. So I think that's a really cool feature to think that they've included to this game. But like you said, before I even think about that, I think I should probably familiarize myself with Dying Light 2 and whatnot. I guess in terms of like, because his whole thing is like he has powers now, right? This notion of the beast. For you, like, what does that add to the experience of combat? And I suppose overall, like, does that add facets to combat that are more than just like, oh, hey, that's cool? Do you feel like the gameplay is actually like really built around these powers, or is that kind of just like icing on top of a system that was already quite strong to begin with?
I think again, smartly they layer it so that, as I said early on, you don't really have much control over when it happens. It just a meter basically builds, and then when that happens, that's it. It starts, and you can't help that. So you can kind of control when it happens, but not properly. And I think as upgrades go on, you get to choose an option that gives you a bit more control over it. But by then, you've played the game enough in a certain way that the threats are higher anyway. So it helps because the enemy count is often quite big, and there's more of the ones that are annoying and faster and throwing projectiles at you. And they have, to counter your newfound power, they have like volatiles that are like even more powerful than before, like big mutant variants of like the infected. And so you have plenty of boss fight encounters that are just based on you having the powers against something that is equally overpowered. So they addressed the balance pretty well. I did worry that it was going to be, like I said, something that would be a game breaker if done wrong. But it's like the whole idea behind the game is like you have more ability, more power, and stuff that you've learned basically from doing all these games. But the challenge is upped with it, and the world is upped with it. And like I said, there's just more of everything. Like even like the slow zombies are very quick to sort of stumble towards you, and like you can get caught out by them very easily. There's like a Resi style sort of quick knife attack thing if they do grab you, if you have knives, like throwing knives equipped and stuff. So
Hmm.
you, because sometimes you'll be like running through areas and like one will just grab you out of nowhere like that, and so it makes it so fluid as well, because that's when the game is at its best, when you can just sort of get used to the map and the world and your powers, and you are just doing what you do so well in all Dying Light games, just that sort of flow. And yeah, but as with Dying Light 2, I think the early hours are very clunky in terms of trying to get used to like the layout of the map and how things are certain heights in certain areas, and getting used to what you can jump, what you can do, and but yeah, like any of those games, it doesn't get much easier to sort of navigate that.
Oh, I think continually, like, this is a series that I've unfortunately overlooked, but I think that it seems like they are evolving on that rather, at this point, like simplistic to describe systems that were in place in that first game. But it certainly seems like this has Techland has just evolved and evolved on this notion of open world zombie games, which, I don't know about you, for me, like, I completely overlook zombie games now because of just being inundated with them. But it seems like they really are like truly sticking to what they have made work, and continually adding new features that kind of like make it stand out from your general first person zombie fare, if you will.
Yeah, that's it. No, I've said to you many times, like zombie fare is like, can't help myself almost. Like I will just keep coming back to it no matter what. Like I was only saying this week, like, right, all that Resi stuff, burnt out on that now. Other things, like, and yet here I am playing Dying Light the Beast very much. Zombies never die.
That's just how we like them. So hopefully they'll keep evolving on that and whatnot. But
Indeed.
yeah, just add another thing to the list that I need to put on my ever growing pile of shame.
Oh boy, yeah, it's way too big, way too big at this point.
As soon as I set some time aside to tackle that, it seems it'll be rewarding nonetheless. But yeah, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll chat about Eclipsium, a game that I'm glad I finally had some time to get to, talking about that pile of shame. So we'll have more on that in a moment. And we're back from our break, and I'm going to dive right into the last thing that we got this week for the grab bag, a short but sweet grab bag this week, that being Eclipsium from developer Housefire and published by everyone's favorite bizarro indie games publisher, Critical Reflex. Yeah. So this was one that we chatted about the demo for Horror Bites long time ago. And, I think we more or less said that it was this very surreal, dreamlike type of a horror adventure game. And while that's certainly true of the final product, what I found with Eclipsium is that the demo is really just a flavor piece, if you will, right? It's more to establish that kind of dreamlike sense of reality within the setting and whatnot. It has this really great, very chunky, pixelated art style that is, not entirely removed from like almost PSX style experiences, which we're big fans of. But I was very pleasantly surprised to get to dive into Eclipsium and find that the demo really only just scratched the surface of it. There are some elements that were present there, but also there is an element here in terms of like the player and their powers and the ways that they can interact with the world to solve the various puzzles that was not present in that demo. And so, I think for me, when I play demos, sometimes I'm a little sort of perturbed by the fact that a demo could just be like the first 20 minutes of a final product, it seems. Yeah. Whereas here with Eclipsium, it was, like I said, this like flavor piece that just was establishing a tone, establishing a vibe, but the game itself actually had some actual surprises in store, which I really loved. So the game story is a little vague, right? It implies that the protagonist has survived or not survived some type of like medical trauma. You wake up in a hospital. You get an opening cutscene that has allusions to like various medical procedures. There's this female figure that you're basically chasing, and will have basically different sort of like figures throughout the world in ghostly ways that is not haunting you, but it's certainly always there at the forefront of some of the environments you're exploring. But you're not given a great deal of context for this like dreamlike world. And as I said, one of the features that was present in the demo that's also present here is that as this is an adventure game, you don't actually have like a traditional inventory system. What you have is what we all have, which is your left and right hand. And when you're able to pick up a key item in an environment, you basically just hold that item in front of you until you use it in the correct location, and then it disappears. So like that little type of a feature, having your hand or hands in front of you at all times, again, and kind of like, I don't know, there's just something odd about that sort of perspective that I really like, which again, like further plays into that surrealist sense of space and of a world. You basically are exploring these worlds that begin more memory-like. You're walking through these very sort of idyllic worlds, and then you basically make it around a bend, and all of a sudden you see this like Mount Doom style tower that has a gigantic fiery eye on the top of it. And then the environments take a turn for the more surreal and more fantastical things begin to happen, both in terms of the construction, but also in like the manipulation of the world. So there's going to be some levels where like the actual world itself can be shifted through interacting with the environments to access new like doors or access new puzzles and things like that. And I think for me, what I like the most about this game that again was not present in the demo is the body horror element, which, you and I are both huge fans of body horror. And from what I remember, that was really not present in the demo because of the fact that here, you basically are able to, at certain points, interact with your hand, and you basically just turn your hand around, you look at your palm, and you have a series of abilities that you unlock periodically. And those abilities allow you to interact with the environment and various puzzles in different ways. So early on, the first power you get, you have a flashback of you basically sitting in your apartment. Your town, the city that you live in, begins to get mortared. You see a soldier running through the city streets, and then you look down at the table and there's like a bread knife on the table. And then when you snap back to the present, you look down at your hand and you have a blade that has grown out of the bottom of your hand. Kind of like Cronenberg style, basically.
Yeah.
Or like Videodrome style is what I was going for. So all of a sudden now you can grow a blade out of your hand, which allows you to slice certain objects in various environments. Now, the ways in which you interact with the environment is pretty straightforward. Early on, you come across a towering tree. You equip that blade, the tree glows, and then you can just slice it and it creates a bridge. So it's not like groundbreaking puzzles or anything like that, but the body horror element, I think, is just like a nice touch to the overall dreamlike aesthetic. Likewise, you're going to be able to have this sort of like second sight ability to find invisible pathways in an environment. And you do that by looking through a hole that grows in your hand. And that becomes your sort of second sight glasses, if you will. And then at the point that I got to before I took a break from playing, like you can have your hand catch on fire like Johnny Storm style from Fantastic Four, and you can use that to illuminate dark corridors or to, light fires, ignite fires on candles and things like that. So, there are maybe one or two more abilities. I didn't get to them, but overall, like it's more about the presentation rather than like the actual execution of these various powers that I thought was nice. And it helps to break up the flow of what is very simply described as like a walking simulator. So I think for me, like that's the level of interactivity that I want
Yeah.
from a majority of walking simulators that help to break things up. Um, and I think that for a game that takes less than 3 hours to complete, that's kind of like the perfect approach to gameplay to keep things a little more, I don't know, it's like keeping you more engaged, I suppose, giving players a bit more agency rather than just like endless walking, if you will.
Yeah, and I think just looking at the combination of like the visuals and the FMV style stuff, that's in
Mm,
there as well, especially with the hands being live action hands. It's like it does kind of offer a constantly oddball nature to it that just. I mean, I was trying to sort of pinpoint exactly what it made me think of, and it was like it's kind of like walking through a '90s point and click adventure, like that's gone to hell, and
mm,
things all fucked up, and it just it's somewhere between what Myst did and like what those sort of regular point and click ones were. It's but in this obviously naturally strange way. I mean the body horror claymation-y sort of style of stuff, like, with the hand and like the all-seeing eye bit and all that. Yeah, it reminds me of a few things we've covered, I think, on Horror Bites in terms of that sort of using a claymation FMV style to sort of
mm,
add to a surreal nature of it. Yeah, I mean, it's the inspiration seemed clear, as I said, in that regard, that you can kind of pinpoint '90s PC games. I think it's probably the best way to put it as an all-round thing, as
yeah,
an inspiration point. But with that, a bit of those sort of modern headfuckery things that we've seen in a few sort of walking simulator style games. So yeah, like I'm not surprised. That when you said about we played this for Horror Whites, I'm thinking I don't remember all this. Like, and you said it's like it was basically a tester, which is sometimes the best way to go about things. I know it's not always easy to do on a higher scale, but certainly at this scale, considering what we usually do see in Horror Bites, having a game that then just uses like the short concepts as something to sort of build a whole different thing on, but with the
mm,
general the thing in the middle that made it compelling in the first place.
mhm.
And yeah, went back to look at what you meant. I was like, oh yeah, like I see it now. I can kind of see the through line of what they were going for. Yeah, like you can tell it's why it was published by Critical Reflex. I'll say as well. It's just
Yeah.
when you think of the stuff like Threshold and Mouthwashing and Arctic Eggs and that, it's yeah, it is perfectly in line with those sort of grungy, sort of weirdo indie
Mm.
games that we are big fans of, naturally.
Yeah. I mean, even like little touches to certain aspects of the design have, I don't know, like that personality or sort of the presentation overall that just like speaks to a developer that um, understands what makes games such as this like more unique, right? It's like it would be very simple just to say this is another walking simulator, but thinking about like some of the platforming sections, which I think are probably the weakest portions of this game. Granted, they are very, very fleeting in terms of like
Yeah.
how long you actually have to do them for. However, in encountering one particular platforming section where I died repeatedly, it did introduce me to this aspect of the design that I really like, which is each time you die, you spawn in the corridor of the hospital that you begin in. And each time you walk down that corridor,
Mm.
the design of it has changed slightly to be reflective of the environment that you just died in. So for the first area, you go through, it's this old like mining town. So you walk through it and it's like you're walking down a mine shaft. The second
Yeah.
one, I died during a puzzle that has these like worm like appendages that grow out of the walls. So when I go down the corridor after dying in that environment, it's filled with those little fleshy appendages that are moving around. So
Mm.
like little touches like that, I really like. And, that doesn't sort of absolve maybe a platforming section or two that I thought weren't that great, but it is one of those little touches that I think just like shows a level of creativity that goes beyond the sort of like exactly what you would expect.
Mm.
And where I finished the game, I didn't have more than like half an hour left with it because it's a pretty short game. But I would say that like this is again like a really fantastic example of getting to follow a game that we covered for Horror Bytes, getting to see the final product. But more importantly, it just shows that like demos don't have to reveal everything because that aspect of like the powers, I don't believe was in the demo. And so that's one of those things we're seeing them get to kind of like run with that. It leaves a more distinguishing mark on the overall experience. And I think overall it was a really strong example of like a horror adventure, or if you want to call it a walking simulator, you can do so. But yeah, just a really strong game that I'm sorry I missed last year, but at the same time, it's pretty understandable given how inundated we were with games.
I know, yeah, it feels quite exhausting when looking back at all the things we didn't cover and going, "Oh shit, that came out."
Yeah.
Oh crap, or even at getting into that December period and going, "Oh, that's going to be out just a little too late," and then thinking, "Oh, sorry, we'll get it to next year," and then you just zone out and forget because it's December and you're like, "I've done enough for the year."
Right. But yeah, it's definitely one that if you get the chance to, I'd highly recommend you check it out. And
it looks extremely my shit. So yeah, that's that's the patented stuff for me.
Absolutely. But yeah, that's going to do it for the grab bag this week. It's like I said earlier, a short but a sweet one. We had nothing but games we enjoyed, and you gave me something to add to my ever-growing list. But hopefully, it's one that we can return to at some point on the podcast once I get to play it and chat about it a little bit more in depth with the beast.
That's it. Yeah, and vice versa as well. So we will probably return to a couple of these things at least, I'd imagine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But before we say goodbye for the week, as one last reminder, be sure to come back on this Thursday for the latest edition of Horror Bytes, which is now gone bi-weekly. And this edition of Horror Bytes will be rounding out Sometimes Dead is Wetter, our aquatic horror theme, in which we chat about two more bite-sized indie horror games that abide by that subgenre sort of flavor, if you will, but in two very distinctly different ways. But yeah, until then, my friend, as always, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at SafeRoomPod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.